2 months into being the mom of 2 under 2, I was overtired and overstimulated. I called my own mom in the middle of the night, crying and in need of advice. Sleep when the toddler sleeps, she said. Okay, but when do I sew? You don't get to sew right now, she said. Welcome to motherhood. She was only trying to help, passing on advice that had been passed on to her, but I knew that giving up the thing that ignites my soul would turn me into a bitter and resentful mom, which would be way worse. There had to be a better way. So I turned to my friend Hanne, who says that being the CEO of a software company was 100 times easier than being a stay-at-home mom.
I always knew that when I eventually had kids, I wanted to be the primary caretaker. However, I quickly realized that making cute lunchboxes and setting up sensory bins was not going to make me happy. So I needed to find a way to be both a present mom as well as fostering my ambition as a designer and an entrepreneur. So if you can relate, we hope you enjoy listening in on our conversations where we explore what life looks like as a multi-passionate mom.
It takes a village. We've all heard this before, but what does that actually mean in a modern context? What does that look like? How do you build it? Hanne and I are going to go through the different kinds of help that we've had, that we've also seen other people have that might be interesting to you, and talk about why we think it's so important, and also, more interestingly, why it seems harder to build your village nowadays and almost taboo to have help. So, Hanne, starting with when Monkey was first born and your mom came to take care of you, walk us through the different kinds of help that you've experienced, what your thoughts are on it, and also help that you've offered people. Because I know some of those are a little bit unconventional, but super interesting.
Yes, so we were very lucky to have my mom come over um, for the first. Monkey was 2 weeks, I think, when my mom came over for about a week. And she basically just took over the household, which was absolutely amazing. She just came in, went to the grocery shopping, did the cooking, did the cleaning, everything. And I think that's probably like the first thing. If we'll have a lot of tips and suggestions here during the podcast, but like the first one is when a newborn, like mom doesn't necessarily need help with the newborn, but she might need help with everything else. And so, yeah, my mom just coming in and feeling very comfortable, just taking over the household, that was amazing. So for like about a week, she was there, and that was such a great help for me and my partner. And then a bit later, my mother-in-law and my father-in-law came over, and so they were there for 6 weeks, I think, because they come from further away, so and they could be there for a longer period of time. So that was also a great help. Again, mainly with some of the household stuff, the cooking, the cleaning, and also because I had to rest quite a bit to have somebody to talk to during the day. So just some company, which was also kind of nice. And then later on, we've had a nanny. So that was only when Monkey was about 6 months, I think. We would have a nanny who came to the house. So she would be there for, in the beginning, just like 2-3 hours in the afternoon because I was still breastfeeding. And so then that was just like very gradually until she was there about 3 days during the week. And she would also do some light household chores while he was sleeping. So that was also really, really helpful until we transitioned to a babysitter. So that was then that my son would go to the babysitter's house. And the reason we started doing that was because it became really difficult for me to be in the house while Monkey's also in the house, because then he would see me and he would want to hang out with me, and I would just want to grab a coffee and go upstairs again, and then it would be like, yeah, just really complicated to be in the same space because he was at that age where the attachment, separation anxiety, and so on really happens. And yeah, that just became too complicated, and also it was really hard for me to completely disconnect if I could constantly still hear my child. So then if I could hear them laughing, I was like, what are they doing? I want to be there. And if I hear them crying, then I was like, oh, maybe I should go see what's wrong or what's happening. So for me, that became really hard, not having that clear separation. And then we've also later on, so when he was about 13, 14 months, I think, there's daycare. And so that is really the more traditional type of daycare where I drop him off. He's with 15 other kids. And yeah, so that's the, I would say, more conventional type of help that I've gotten so far.
So the one that stands out to me the most is the babysitter. How did you actually find her? Was it the nanny who then just took Monkey to her house? Was it a friend of yours? Because I wouldn't even know what to search online if I were looking for some that kind of setup.
Yeah, in Portugal, that's actually a fairly normal setup, I would say. And so it's yeah, it's really not that hard to find. So I asked in a Facebook group, I asked my friends for recommendations because it's always nicer if you have somebody that has been recommended that has taken care of other children that you know. And so she came highly recommended, and then she was just taking care of one other boy most of the time. So they were just only two kids, and yeah, she was taking care of them at her house.
Okay, I imagine if I had to translate that into a kind of American setup, it could be something where you and a friend who also have kids go in together with having a nanny and then maybe take turns whose house she goes to, or maybe you even just with your friend take turns taking care of each other's kids and you kind of become that nanny. Now you get half the free time, but it could be an interesting alternative. And I also, it kind of, you said the word babysitter, which for me, the context there is a teenager. I don't know why, but the stereotypical, I was a babysitter when I was like 13, but
Yeah.
that could also work if you don't have access to a nanny, which I know in different places around the world, the culture around nannies is so different. When I lived in Dubai, everyone, all young families had a live-in nanny. And in the States, it's seen as more of a luxury. Here in Latvia, every mom I know has one. So it can be different. But if you're in the States or somewhere where it's not as normalized to have a nanny, you could just go for a more babysitter like structure where you find a teenager, a responsible young adult who wants a part-time job and can, maybe the kids don't go to their house, but they come over to yours as a traditional nanny would and help you. They play with the kids and kind of surface level take care of them so that you can be in your house and do your thing if that works for you, which I know it doesn't work for Hannah, but that's very interesting. Very, very interesting.
Yeah. The babysitter setup, yeah, in Belgium we have a word for that, which is literally translates as day mom. So it's actually like a recognized profession, and it's called day mom. And so you actually need to have like accreditation for that. And so it's like if you have like a mini daycare at your house, you're like a day mom. And so yeah.
I see. Okay, because I know the US does have these smaller independent daycares where the woman has a qualification and she lets the kids come into their home. So I see it being like that.
Mm,
Okay, super interesting. And I want to go back to what you said when we were talking about having a newborn. I think it's so important just to reiterate that a lot of times the help that the mom needs is not with the newborn. I couldn't agree more. It's typically with house chores, meals, but you could even take that further. And if you're not necessarily looking for help taking care of your kids, you might need help and it still qualifies as help and it still counts as building your village. If you get help with things outside of childcare, like a housekeeper or one of these meal services or anything that really makes your job as a stay at home mom easier, would qualify as help. So you can get creative. And like with the newborn, I know you were mentioning you guys did a food rotation. Is that what you call it? Where
Yeah.
a bunch of friends get together and kind of organize who's going to cook what, and then you deliver it to the mom. You don't, overstep or go in for dinner or whatever, but you're just doing them such a big favor by having meals prepped, even if it's just for a week, taking that off their plate. I think that's another really unique and super cool idea as well. And also, you mentioned just going over to your friend's house and taking their baby for a walk if they want to breathe or go to the gym. You flew to Turkey to do that, so it's a bit different.
Yeah, that was a bit of a special case. So my friend living in Turkey at the time, I was single, working remote, so I could very easily, work from anywhere. And she had a spare bedroom, and I was like, in my mind, honestly, I wish I could say that it was like, oh, I really wanted to help her out. Honestly, that wasn't even as much, the case. It was
Mhm.
more like, oh, she has a spare room, in
Go
Turkey.
to
I can work
Turkey.
from anywhere. And it would be nice to see my friend, she had her baby, like then I get to see her baby too. And when I arrived there, I noticed that my friend was, yeah, not in a good state, really, really tired. And she really needed help because her baby was not sleeping at all at night. He was basically never sleeping unless she was walking around with him. So it was like very, very taxing. And yeah, when I was there, I just took the baby out. And I remember, and I think this is actually such an important one to touch on too, is like I remember that first she was like, oh no, you don't have to do that, and I was like, no, but I want to, like, there's absolutely no problem for me, like I'm going on a walk anyways, like I'm gonna listen to my audiobook, whatever, like let me take your baby out. And then she just fell asleep and like woke up 3 hours later, just being like,
Super
what
grateful.
just happened? And it's, I think that part of like, oh no, you don't have to do it, it's like,
Mhm.
no, take the help. Like, just,
Yes.
if somebody offers you help, if somebody is like, hey, I'll gladly cook for you, I'll do your laundry, I'll come help you clean up, like, don't be a superhuman. We're not superwoman. Like,
Right. You
we
don't
all
get a
need
medal for
help.
doing it without any help. I think this is something I struggled with, especially because it, in American culture, for some reason, nannies and having help is somewhat seen as bourgeois or um, maybe even a little bit shameful, like you can't do it on your own kind of thing. I mean, we see content creators who make it big, and the first thing people want to know is, oh, well, does she have a nanny? Where are the kids? Oh, she has a nanny. And I've had a nanny for a week now, and it's going great. I'm really grateful for her. We don't need her services anymore because my mom just flew to Europe to be with us, talk about platinum grade community. But just to hire a nanny for the week and a half that I needed help was really something I had to get over within my own self because I just grew up around this concept that, well, you're the mom, you have to do it. And I think that you're right. Just accepting, even if you're starting with something small, like having someone cook you a meal, it can be tough when you're just so used to the culture that says, no, 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 like that's too much. But if you start by accepting help in small ways, then when you really do need help, it'll be a lot easier to ask and accept it. At least that's how it's been in my case. I started with actually, I started with a lot of help. And it was because we moved to Mexico to have our first baby. And what I found there is it is incredibly kid centric and child friendly. Every restaurant has a room for the kids to go play in, supervised. And everywhere you go, there's special tables for kids, and everyone is so excited to see your kids. I bring my girls to the nail salon, and the techs that aren't working are loving on them and helping me take care of them. It's just such a different environment to what I was used to. And what I found was it's very common for multi-generational families, for families to live together. So my OBGYN there, who's also a friend of mine now, she lives with her mother, and the grandmother then helps take care of the two young boys. And I absolutely loved that idea. I love my family. If I can force them to live with me, like I knew I was going to try. And so that living, that experience is what opened my eyes to the possibility of multi generational living. And so my husband and I pitched it to my parents, and they thought it would be a fun, let's try it. We got a house together for a year. And speaking for myself, I absolutely loved it. I loved having the help, but I loved that they were also getting care from someone who was going to be in their life forever. Their grandmother, I knew she had their best interests at heart. And my dad, he's so great with kids as well. So that was a really big thing for us that I wouldn't have even known about or been comfortable with had I not seen it in other cultures. And since then, the only other help I've experienced or tried is this nanny for a week and a half. So I don't have a lot of experience outside of multi generational living, but I will say that I think it's more doable than people might imagine. All of our friends had questions about, what it was like to live with your parents. I think there's this idea that maybe there's a lot of fighting or invasiveness, but honestly, if you just have a conversation about what the boundaries are and what everyone's kind of roles are around the home, and also respect, I had to learn to respect my parents' style of parenting. It's not necessarily the same way that I parent. And I could have tried to micromanage everything they were doing with my daughter and really get hands on in that relationship, which would have been extra work for me. It would have been stressful for them, always trying to think about how they were talking to my daughter. Is it a way that DeLaney's going to like? And kind of interrupt that relationship that they were building. And I learned to just accept that they raised me and my brothers, and I'm very happy with how we turned out. So they really can't do that terrible of a job. And accepting help also means allowing people to help you in a way that may not be exactly 100% how you would do it if you were doing it for yourself. Does that make sense?
I think it's actually a trap that many women fall into also with their partner. Like I've seen it
Mm,
firsthand
yeah.
where they are so controlling about the kids, whether it's the nap schedule, whether it's how the food has to be prepared, whether it's how the nappy needs to be changed, that the partner at some point is actually like, I feel like I can't do anything right. And so they step back. And I think that is like so detrimental and so sad because then you have a woman who's feeling very very lonely and as if she has to like have everything on her shoulders and a partner who feels really unappreciated and like he or she can't help out and it is because of that control issue. I think at that point we can call it an issue where of course it's your kid so it's so important and you want to do it right and you have probably this vision of what you believe is right, which probably a whole other episode what you know before having kids thought that you would do and then what you actually end up doing during the whole thing, but that's a whole other episode. But yeah, and then if you're too strict in all of that, then it just becomes impossible for people to help you out, and they feel like they can't do it right. And the moment that somebody feels like they can't do it right, it's impossible to help. And I think that's why certain people don't have somebody to clean their house. It's not necessarily because they can't afford it. It's not because but it's because they're so particular on how everything has to be cleaned that nobody else can do it to their standards. And I remember, I think it's actually Martha Stewart who said this, but where it was like, if it's 80, like done 80% the way you would like it, but you spend 0% of your time, that's better than you spending 100% of your time on it. And I really think about that when I outsource certain tasks. And I know this might sound weird, but I think even in the education, it's like there's certain things where, like I will ask people like, please don't let them sleep after 3 p.m. because the problem is that then in the evening it just becomes a disaster. And that's, I ask that in daycare too. Like, hey, after, it's actually after 2, after 2 p.m., like, please like no more napping. And that's just because I know my child, and then they can respect that, and it's a fairly easy thing. But if I'm like, hey, you can't go to the park with him because I'm way too scared, and please don't put him on a bike, and also don't walk on in the street, and yeah, if you could just like keep him in a room full of full of round edges, that would be perfect, you know. Then I think it just becomes impossible to have that help and to accept that. And yeah, I think to your point, like with our parents or close family, it's even more important because you also want your kids to have that relationship with those people. And this is not paid help that is like doing everything exactly the way you ask them to. This is the grandparents who will have like a lifelong relationship with your kid. And so it's totally okay that that is a different relationship than what you know, have with your child, or even like a different way of playing and a different way of behaving. And yeah, to speak to intergenerational living, we we went on holidays. We had the chance to go to Bali, and the my family-in-law was there. And honestly, the holidays were pretty hard. Like the travel there, 23 hours with a 1 year old was just hardcore. He was sick. Then my partner got sick. I got sick. Honestly, it was not a good 2 weeks. Like in any stretch of the imagination, this was not your dream holiday. But we actually, like, my partner turned to me and he's like, "Ah, I feel so good," and I'm like, wait, what's going on here? Why do we feel like this is actually relaxing, even though it's not? And it was because the grandparents were there, and because they were there to take a little bit of that burden, and we were living in one house, and it's after that holiday that we actually decided to come to my family for a couple of months, live with my dad in my elderly house. So like, talk about like going back. And it's been so good. Like it's been way better than I thought it would. Like you said, there's definitely like, yeah, some things you, and you need to respect each other's space, and you need to, but I mean, you're also adults, so you can definitely talk about it. But it's, yeah, it's been those incidental moments of help that you're getting, where it's even just like, oh, I can go to the bathroom because there's somebody else in the living space that can keep an eye on my toddler. It's huge, and we don't have that anymore most of the time. So yeah, kudos for intergenerational living. Like I'm also a convert now. There's maybe another way that you can make this work if you can't like move in with your family. It's when I was coming over for Christmas to meet up with my family. I was staying at my mom's house, and so the house was not baby proof. And having a 1 year old running around, like it was just stressful. Like it was really not relaxing to be in the house. And I was like, how am I gonna do this for a week? Like this is gonna be hard. Like if a week, because it's bad weather, it's raining, you can't just go outside. Like it's not the ideal situation. And so I called the same friend that I helped out in Turkey, like lives now in Belgium again. And so I called her and I was like, you have a playroom, right? Like, can I please come spend some time at your house? And she was like, yeah, sure, come over. And so then with her two kids, my kid, we just were sitting in the playroom. And again, you have that moment where you can just go to the bathroom, go make yourself a coffee, and not have to be afraid that, you know, your kid is going to kill himself in the minute and a half that you're not in the room. So even that idea of just like, with two parents or more, get 3 5 kids together, you know, and then you can step out of the room for half an hour to do that phone call that you really needed to do, or to, you know, answer that email that you really needed to answer. Like I think that even that can be really really helpful if you have those people in your village, if you want to call it that way, that you can, yeah, do those kind of exchange with.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. My mom likes to say many hands make light work. And that's what you're doing. You're just involving as many hands as possible. I think that's also great advice for people who maybe aren't close with their family or don't feel comfortable involving their family for whatever personal reason, reaching out to friends who also have kids that you can, yeah, just share the load. And whether that's in your case, childcare, getting together and just watching the kids together, maybe that's rotating different meal plans. I know we meal prep, it would be so easy for me to just make a double portion of what I'm making and bring it to a friend who, doesn't have to cook that evening or whatever. And I think that it's a really nice a way to think about how to build your community is to be the community or be the kind of help that you would want to receive, because when you give help, like you flew to your friend in Turkey and you were able to spend time with her, and then she returned the favor, she was able to have a playroom that you could then go to. By giving the help, you're giving that person permission to then reciprocate, whereas otherwise they don't offer, not because they don't want to help you, but because they don't know what your boundaries are, what you're comfortable with. And so I think that that's a really interesting way to build your village. I know, is it Michaeline Duclef who calls them allo parents? People that help you raise your kid. They're people that ideally are going to be in their life for some time. Maybe that's family or family friends or close friends. And something interesting that she says that I think about whenever I feel a little bit guilty about leaving my girls with my mom or even just the nanny, I remember she said that you get sick of your kids, but have you ever considered that your kids get sick of you as well? And that they actually enjoy seeing other faces and having other conversations with different people who can offer them a different kind of relationship. And so remembering that your kids are people too, and they also like to have different relationships and they play different ways with different people because of different age groups, and they have a different relationship with their grandmother than they do with their oma and their mom. And by forcing yourself to be the only caregiver of your kids, you're actually robbing them of the opportunity to develop those relationships with those other people who would otherwise be excited to spend time with your kid and give you a break, which is the added benefit, of course.
One other thing that I know we touched on in another episode is the fact that sometimes we feel really, really guilty asking for help if it's not because we have something specific to do. Like if you want to sew, or if I just want to, an afternoon where I can just paint or draw or do something creative, it feels really wrong to ask for help for those moments. But it's so important to get that moment that you can recharge, and however you recharge best, that's what you should be doing. And so please don't only ask for help when you have that doctor's appointment, or when you really need to do something, or when you're at the brink of exhaustion and you just need a nap. Like I think if you can start, like you said, little by little, accept those little bits of help and then use those to just never get to that point where you're like, I can't do this anymore, I need help now, then it's also, you're in a better place to um, ask for help, but without it being like this, I need this now. It's like, oh no, yeah, if you could take my kid for an hour, that would be great. And then it doesn't matter whether it's at 2 o'clock or at 3 o'clock, like that actually gives you that flexibility and that freedom to start experimenting with this. And then obviously when you have that doctor's appointment, or when you have something like more specific on, it's not the first time that they're staying with the neighbor. It's and so it also then becomes much easier the moment that you really need that help to have it available.
I am so glad that you brought that back up. I mean, that's the whole purpose, I think, with having help, is that so you can continue to do the things that fill your cup. I couldn't have said it better. And that's, I mean, the whole podcast is multi-passionate moms, and the whole purpose of it is to find time to work on that inner spark, the thing that fuels you. And you're absolutely right that asking for help, and I think you kind of touched on this, it helps to have, maybe routine is the wrong word but maybe an agreement or a plan if you're having help. I mean, with a nanny, it's quite obvious because you're paying them to be there at certain times, certain hours. But I did have to discuss with my mom, what her week looks like and when it would be feasible for her to take the girls to the park or be the one that has eyes on them, and it's so much easier if you pre-plan that with people rather than just me going to my mom and being like, hey, I want to sew. Can you be the person that makes sure they don't electrocute themselves? And, she says, well, I've got the gym or I've got the nails or I've got whatever. And it really helps to kind of coordinate that, as you mentioned, with like an hour here, an hour there. And then it's not a surprise to anyone. It's easier to get the help because they can plan their lives around helping and getting help from you. And then, as you said, if something does come up, it's not uncomfortable for anyone because they have that relationship, like you said, the neighbor or a family friend or something like that.
Yeah, I did this also for a friend of mine. Like her daughter came over, and then first, we had a couple of play dates where the mom would still, be there. And then at some point, she actually had like a real thing that she needed to be free for. And it was much easier to ask me then, like, hey, would it be possible that she stays just for like an hour and a half at yours? And because she already knew the house, she already knew my son, she already knew me, like it wasn't that big of a stretch. And then when she was about to give birth of her second, she was like, oh, could my kid actually like maybe stay the night at yours in case the delivery is, and again, it's like it's because we already did that like a couple of times in like smaller increments, when it wasn't as stressful as like a birth, that
Right.
that was a possibility.
And it's more comfortable for the kids
Mm,
too because they're comfortable with the adult. Spending a night at your house wasn't as frightening because they've been to your house so many times with their mom, and it was, I imagine, a much more comfortable situation for them as well. We hope that you got some good ideas for building your community, your village, or getting a little additional help. Maybe even some ideas on how to help a friend of yours who just had a baby. You were not meant to do it on your own. It took me reading this really good book called Hunt, Gather, Parent by Micheline Duclef. I referenced it a little bit earlier in the podcast. Highly recommend it. But it took her book and discussing different cultures and how they work together to raise children communally. It opened my eyes to a whole bunch of other ways to parent, and I'm so grateful I read it, which is why in our next episode, Hannah and I are actually going to go through our favorite resources. Not all of them are necessarily parenting. We also like these self-development books, things that help us become better people so that we can then become better multi-passionate moms. So if that is something that interests you, tune in next Monday.